Every 30 years, the blood moon rises over Black Ridge, Arizona. And every time it does, someone disappears. People thought it was just a lunar eclipse, until they saw what was moving in the red glow. Locals still call that night the Blood Moon Massacre. Welcome to Mr. Horror Tales. You're about to hear the full nightmare of the blood moon. Did you see the paper today? Mark asked me excitedly. I had. Total lunar eclipse this Friday. His perverse excitement irked me, but I had known he'd always been fascinated by it throughout our marriage. I talked to Steve about it today, he said, lowering his voice as if savoring the words. He told me they've known for a while, astrological calendar or something. Steve's been tracking it at the station. Had someone at the school told you? Yes, I lied. You should have told me. His irritation sharpened, then softened into something almost gleeful. After a beat of silence, he asked, "How many do you think he'll kill this year?" I drew a breath, forcing myself to steady the irritation in my voice. I don't know, Mark. You know I don't like to talk about it. But the numbers clawed their way back, unbidden. Everyone in town knew them. Tuesday, July 6, 1982, one killed. Thursday, December 30th, that same year, one more. Thursday, August 17th, 1989, 4. Wednesday, December 9th, 1992, another 4. Monday, November 29th, 1993, 4 again. And just this spring, Wednesday, April 3rd, 1996, 6 gone. 20 bodies in Amherst. No, I did not like to think about it. More than last time I'd imagine, I said at last, if only to placate him. Honey? Mark's voice lifted with a strange, eager brightness. Steve says they're certain they'll catch him this time. It wasn't the first time the police thought they were closing in on their killer. They've said that before, I reminded him. I know, Mark rushed, excitement rising. But Steve, he couldn't give me details, you know, cop stuff. But he swears it's different this time. Steve was a good man and meant well for a cop, but half the time he didn't know his ass from his elbow. I hope he's right, I said, though I didn't believe it. The first killing had shaken the town to its core. Wednesday, July 7th. An early morning jogger stumbled across the mangled body of Michael Strong, a 16-year-old delinquent along the banks of Puffer's Pond. His throat had been slashed so deep, his head was nearly severed. The sheer brutality suggested someone who knew him. One of his mother's revolving boyfriends was hauled in, questioned, and just as quickly cut loose. The town was buzzing that summer, the summer after Mark and I graduated. Our relationship had only just begun. He'd been terrified I'd meet someone else at school that fall. Then the murder happened, and he was horrified, yet unable to look away. After all, his younger brother had gone to school with Michael Strong. Me too, really want to see the monster who could be doing this. He paused. The bus is here. Tell Shar I love her. Will do. Love you. Love you too. I'll see you tonight. It was hard to believe Sharon was already 7. August 2nd, 1989, still the hardest day of my life. 9 hours of labor, each contraction a tidal wave tearing through me. I remember clutching Mark's hand so tightly, my nails left crescents in his skin, his voice steadying me through the pain. And then at last her cry split the air, sharp, fierce, alive. The nurse laid her on my chest, warm and squirming, and Mark's eyes brimmed with tears, as if he'd never seen anything so perfect. Mark had always wanted a baby. I made him wait. First my undergraduate, then my master's. We married in the middle, his plumbing jobs keeping us afloat while I scraped for lab grants that always came too late. When I finally told him we could try, the joy in his face was something I'll never forget. And Sharon, our Sharon, was the greatest gift we'd ever been given. Just over 2 weeks later, 4 students were butchered on campus. August 17, 1989, the night of freshman orientation. Someone had slipped through an unlocked window on the first floor of Baker House, in and out, quick as a shadow. The girls, Lisa Rathbone, Shannon Armstrong, Tracy Lloyd and Denise Derwick, had left the latch undone. It was enough. The killer started with Lisa and Denise crushing their skulls with a hammer before the others even stirred. By the time Shannon and Tracy woke to the sound of hammer-squelching brain, it was already too late. Their screams tore through the dorm, echoing down the hallways, but the orientation chaos and the lunar eclipse that had drawn so many students outside kept help from coming. By the time anyone forced the door, the room was a slaughterhouse. Lisa and Denise lay unrecognizable. Shannon wasn't in much better of a state. Tracy was still alive, barely, her body twitching as she slipped into a coma she would never wake from. Mark was horrified, and me, if it hadn't been for the pregnancy, I might have been there that night working. That was the first time anyone began whispering about the pattern, how it might not be a coincidence at all. Michael Strong's murder, and then Chelsea Murphy's that December, had rattled the town. Both were brutal, senseless killings in a place that prided itself on safety. But they were treated as isolated tragedies, the kind of horror that struck once a generation. No one, at least not openly, spoke of the fact that both deaths had fallen on nights of a lunar eclipse. Mark would later claim that after Murphy's murder, he knew the killer only struck beneath an eclipse. But I knew he was lying. He hadn't seen it. I had. I recognized it immediately, though I never told him. To his credit, after the second murder, he was quick to call it what it was, a serial killer. It was the early 80s, though, and every brutal crime was a serial killer's work. Until months passed, then years, and the fear dulled. Even Mark let it slip from his mind. Until '89, then everything shifted. I rolled my chair back, opened the bottom drawer of my file cabinet, and the astrological calendar peered up at me. Friday, September 27th. The paper smelled faintly of dust and old coffee, the corners softened from years of being thumbed. It hadn't been a coincidence that Michael Strong and Chelsea Murphy were killed under lunar eclipses. Full eclipses that crossed over Amherst coincided with killings. Eclipses that missed the town did not. Partial eclipses produced nothing. For a while I let doubt creep in. Maybe I'd been seeing patterns where none existed. Then Baker House. And now, September 27th glared back at me from the calendar, heavy as an omen. That old feeling twisted, stirring in my stomach. I swallowed hard, trying to push it down and to steady myself. Had been the year I began my doctorate, and the year panic swept the university. Security patrols doubled, curfews were enforced, and dorm windows were nailed shut. The campus they called the zoo fell silent. Thank God for our parents, whose babysitting let me return to the lab, and for Mark, by then a newly minted master plumber, who threw himself into work. When the school year ended without another attack, a memorial plaque was set in the ground outside Baker Hall. By the following year, the speeches grew shorter, the vigil crowds smaller, the memories dimmer. And by December of 1992, the murders had been all but forgotten. By then, I was teaching 100-level classes to rooms of glassy-eyed underclassmen. Finals were looming. The holidays hung in the air, and even after a lifetime in this town, the sight of it dressed for Christmas could still coax a smile from me. Yes, even that December. The bricks glowed warm against the cold. Lanterns burned in the town center, and campus lawns sprouted Christmas trees and snowmen. We'd only been in our first house since February, but Mark made that first Christmas there feel enchanted. It was the kind of calm that settles in just before January, and February buried the town beneath snowdrifts higher than windows, the wind cutting sharp at 10 below. My students, out-of-staters, internationals, and Eastern Mass kids alike, chattered with wide-eyed excitement about the coming lunar eclipse, calling it a Christmas miracle. I smiled and let them. I didn't have the heart to tell them what it really meant. I was grateful that none of my students were killed, none from the university at all. Wednesday, December 9th. 4 Amherst College students had been laughing amidst a snowball fight on East Drive when the shooter struck. Jamal Navir, Elizabeth. Hawkins and Dorothy Freeman went down instantly, gunned down with precision no amateur could manage. Jacob Donnelly ran. The shooter clipped his shoulder, dropped him in the snow, and while he begged and pleaded, put a final round in his head, execution style. It had stopped snowing earlier that afternoon. Steve, by then on the force, told Mark that if the flakes had kept falling, they might have been able to track the tires. Horse shit, if you ask me. Steve was working a desk, not homicide. What they did have were 7 shell casings, all 45s from a Colt M11911. The manhunt exploded. The press gave the killer a name, the Blood Moon Killer. I don't know who coined it, but it stuck, spreading like wildfire. Police began dragging in every Amherst resident who owned a 45, interrogating veterans, burning through leads. And then, just after New Year's, the whole of UMass reeled when Professor Ian Lowe was arrested. A veteran, his service pistol conveniently missing, his wife refusing to confirm his alibi. Mark was stunned. We'd eaten dinner at Lowe's house just weeks before over Thanksgiving. He tried to save face by insisting Lowe had always rubbed him the wrong way. Attractive men often did. The trial began that June, a full-blown circus. Reporters flooded Hampshire District Court. Western Mass had never seen anything like it. The police, the prosecution, the whole community believed they had their man. Lowe had lived in Amherst since '78. He was large, fit, a veteran. His gun was gone. He couldn't explain that away. They tried to tie all 10 murders to him. The details that didn't fit, that he wasn't in Amherst on July 6, 1982, that he couldn't possibly have squeezed through Baker House's window, were conveniently left unspoken. I still remember the broadcast in September. Sharon was playing with Mark on the carpet as I watched the news. The defense had introduced a new witness, graduate student Kelly Horan. I knew her. I knew about her relationship with Lowe. I knew about his relationships with TAs, with staff, with anyone who batted an eye his way. It didn't take long before the prosecution's case started to fray. But as November neared and the next anticipated lunar eclipse approached, the town held its breath. One way or another, we would find out whether the Blood Moon Killer was already in custody or still at large. Monday, November 29th, 1993, the moon had darkened to the deepest shade I had ever seen. Blood moon is a misnomer. It is usually a dull orange. But that night it was nearly red, glowing like a burning coal as I drove home beneath it. People said the eclipse lasted an hour. In truth, it was 46.7 minutes. When I walked in, Mark told me the news. 4 more dead. 2 students had been killed just off the north of campus near Fairfield Street, out under the sky watching the moon. Riley Tompkins and Sarah Jacobs. Riley had taken a knife to the back of her throat. the blade driven deep enough to push through where her Adam's apple had been. Sarah had made an awful scream as she ran, but she was silenced by a single round from a Colt 45. The bullet punched in just at the juncture of neck and shoulder, tearing through muscle, artery, and bone. It should have killed her. It did not. The killer finished the work by stomping her skull. A neighbor, 56-year-old Ken Williams, had heard the shot and stepped outside with his own revolver, hoping to help. Instead, he came upon the killer scraping brain matter from the soles of their boots on the curb. Ken took a single shot above the left eye. He dropped instantly. The killer then drifted back toward the university. Graduate student Lee Hsu had just left the life sciences lab. He did not run. He took a bullet to the chest, dropped where he stood, and never rose again. Mark had been horrified. How could he not? I worked right there. I was horrified too, though for a different reason. I had known Lee Hsu. He had been an exceptional student, quiet, precise, courteous. His work in the lab, meticulous. Professor Lowe was released soon after. His marriage dissolved and he moved far from Amherst. The town barely whispered his name again. Steve told Mark the rest one night over beers at our kitchen table, while I strained my ears from the other room. The CCTV footage had caught a little, but not enough. Lee Hsu pausing outside the Life Sciences building, waving at someone off camera, then lowering his hand in confusion a split second before the shot punched through his chest. Steve admitted that he believed the killer was a student. There had been no real suspects, no trail to follow, just a body on the pavement, a half-wave frozen in time, and a single .45 shell left behind. In a move that shocked everyone, the university shut its doors and sent students and faculty home. The press tore them apart for it. After all, hadn't it become obvious by then that the killer only struck under eclipses? Sending everyone away was little more than theater. Worse, the police signed off on the decision before realizing they might have just delivered the killer back to whatever hometown he'd come from. Everyone could see it. They were desperate, grasping at straws as lost as the rest of us. Mark, meanwhile, was transfixed, awestruck, horrified, fascinated, as if he couldn't look away from a fire even while it consumed everything around it. I was left with something else. The same hollow aftermath that always followed, a pounding headache, sharp and sour like a hangover. A creeping numbness that dulled the edges of thought. And beneath it all, the crushing futility of knowing it would happen again. After those 4 deaths, the town's frenzy dulled. The headlines shrank, the nightly news moved on, and the chatter in grocery store aisles faded to silence. The case went cold, another unsolved knot consigned to rumor. The university, eager to wash its hands, erected yet another plaque, this one just off Governor's Drive, for the 3 students lost. No mention of Ken Williams. A middle-aged man didn't carry the same weight as students with futures ahead of them. His name slipped into silence, a footnote, if even that. Months without an eclipse bled into years. Sharon started school, and life found its strange rhythm again. My career in academia began to gather momentum just as Mark's plumbing business took off. We built a life that looked from the outside almost enviable. A neat house, steady work, laughter at the dinner table. Mark longed for another child, a son, he said, to balance the scales. I managed to talk him out of it, sheltering behind the excuse of my career. Grants, research, conferences, I told him I needed time, but the truth was simpler and far darker. I couldn't imagine bringing another child into a world where the hair itself seemed haunted, where shadows returned every time the moon burned red. One child was enough. One was already too much to risk. Nearly 3 whole years slipped by. We had moved into a larger, prettier house on Pine Hollow, ironically, just down the road from where Michael Strong had been butchered years before. The neighborhood near Puffer's Pond was quiet now, scrubbed clean of memory, though I could never quite forget. I buried myself in work, papers and lectures, piling one on top of another, until March crept in, almost unnoticed. It was then that the familiar sensation returned, settling into me with a weight I could neither shake nor name. It began in the gut, a hollow gnawing. Not pain exactly, but an emptiness. My skin felt restless, my blood quickened, my thoughts turned jagged. I had learned to recognize it over the years, though no explanation ever followed. It was always the same, a slow, ravenous stirring that left me uneasy in my own body, as though I'd been hollowed out and replaced with something that craved more than I could ever give. Wednesday, April 3rd, brought with it a flicker of hope. The eclipse that day would pass unseen, swallowed by the afternoon sky, and some whispered that perhaps this time Amherst would be spared. But hope, like every other illusion, dissolved quickly. Police and National Guard patrolled in droves, posted on every corner, and clustered in pairs across campus, hell, across the town. Their presence was loud, visible, meant to reassure, and yet it left blind spots large enough for a body to slip right through. The killer did just that. They walked unnoticed into the Mullins Center, where life went on as though nothing could happen under such heavy guard. Inside the women's locker room, amid the steam and hiss of the showers, senior Chelsea McRae. The weapon was simple, domestic, no larger than a dinner knife, yet sharp enough to punch through bone. It was driven upward with such force that the blade lodged to its hilt in her jaw, pinning her scream where it started. Water continued to run. Curtains drawn, steam swirling lazily through the tiled room. For several long minutes, her body went undiscovered, the scene hidden in plain sight while the killer slipped away. Only when another girl pulled back the curtain after seeing blood did the silence finally break, and the air filled with the screaming that never really leaves you once you've heard it. Students and staff poured from the Mullins Center in a blind surge, bodies colliding, voices shrieking, while the authorities stumbled over themselves to cordon the exits, to push inward, to simply make sense of the chaos. In the crush of it all, the killer moved unnoticed. Their hand twitched against the grip of the concealed .45, an almost uncontrollable urge to fire into the crowd. Why didn't they? Perhaps some primal reflex of self-preservation intervened. The instinct that usually drove them forward had, for once, held them back. Instead, they slipped toward the physical plant. Inside, the workers carried on, almost untouched by the commotion outside, the muffled roar of the crowd barely reaching them. One man, Devon Wade, even stopped the killer to ask what was happening. They walked past him without a word. Seconds later, inside, the killing began. Robert McMillan was the first. A single shot below the right eye, neat, clinical, and he fell without so much as a cry. The sound drew Kevin Faherty from a side door. He froze at the sight, Robert's body sprawled on the floor, the gun already swinging toward him, and managed only a strangled "no" before the bullet buried itself in his chest. Behind the killer, another door opened. Devon Wade again, the same man who had asked so casually a moment before. Why had he come running toward gunfire? Maybe the sound was dulled. Maybe the chaos outside distracted him. Whatever the reason, he lasted only a breath. Her round caught his neck, sending him staggering, hands pressed to the wound as blood sprayed in great wet bursts. He collapsed, gargling on the floor. The killer pressed on. In a supply closet, Javier Madera was discovered curled up in a ball, whispering in accented English, "Please." It was the only word he got out before the .45 split his skull open, painting the shelves behind him. At the far end of the plant, a flicker of movement gave away Raymond Gibson. He lunged before the killer could fire, a heavy fist cracking across their face. The gun discharged, the round grazing his thigh, but Gibson was built like a wall and bore down with brute strength. One massive hand clamped around the killer's throat, the other wrenched the pistol free. For a moment it seemed over, but the Blood Moon killer was not sustained by human limits. In that frenzy, they clawed downward with their free hand, nails ripping through fabric and flesh, tearing Gibson's scrotum open in a savage, animal motion. His scream was primal, reflexive, and his grip faltered. The killer seized the .45, shoved the muzzle against his skull, and fired. Bone and brain matter spattered the wall. Gibson toppled, finally still. The plant was silent, save for the echo of dripping water, settling dust, and the faint hiss of blood pooling on the concrete. The killer moved on instinct alone, slipping out of the plant with a predator's caution, hugging the shadows, skirting the buildings where cameras were mounted. Blood clung to their skin, soaked their clothes, hardened in their hair. It should have made them visible to anyone with eyes. And in truth, people did see. Faces turned, gazes lingered, but no one intervened. In the chaos, who would step in front of a 5'3" woman dripping red when the killer was still at large? They reached their car unchallenged, hands trembling only as the key slid into the ignition. That same nameless force that had driven the slaughter pulled them onward, down Long Plain Road, where they veered off and waded into the brook. The water was glacial, biting, yet no shock registered. Flesh numbed as the blood peeled away, drifting downstream in black-red ribbons. They stripped, tugged on stained gym clothes from a duffel bag, and weighted their ruined outfit with stones before sinking it in the current. Then back into the car northbound, the steering wheel quivering under their grip. Above, the blood moon loomed, ripe, swollen, deeper than rust. Impossible not to stare. Impossible not to feel the hunger ease, the body settling into the quiet tremor of satiation. By the time they reached Bay State Franklin, the call had been made, a husband's frantic voice on the other end, demanding to know what had happened. She soothed him in steady tones, explained she'd only been caught in the stampede at the Mullins Center, elbow to the eye, a forearm to the throat, the crush of bodies in flight. That, she said, was why she bore a shiner, the dark rings around her neck, the concussion pounding through her skull. The concussion justified the drive north. The doctors weren't convinced, not fully. Their expressions flickered with doubt, catching on the seams in her story. But she was injured, she was trembling, she was a victim. That was enough. The world bends toward the simplest explanation, and no one looked closer. And really, who could blame a woman for hysteria after escaping the Blood Moon killer? I never really come to until the morning after. The edges of the night arrive first, fragments, impressions, and only with daylight do memory congeal into something I can hold without it slipping through my fingers. Over the years, those fragments have multiplied. Where there was once a black hole, there is now a series of jagged images I can piece together like a child's brutal collage. As a child, I was described as having terrible tantrums. I remember only an echo. 9 years old, a bat, my brother's leg broken. He never forgave me. I never forgave myself once the story was told aloud and sealed into the family record. In middle school, there was a sleepover. Shelley, Thomas, and I woke to a frenzy I could not name. The police were called. I was taken for observation and released, the adults shrugging it off as a fleeting aberration. They saw me. They didn't see what pushed me. For a long time I tried to contain it. I would lock myself in the house on nights when the moon threatened blood, pad the windows and chain the doors. The ravenous thing in my gut, however, paid no attention to locks. They'd boiled until it burned through. If I did not feed it, if I did not give it its obscene satiation, I felt as though I would be unmade. The hunger was not metaphor. It was a pressure, a clawing pressure beneath ribs and reason, a demand that blurred thought and will until all that remained was animal survival. After Michael Strong, the nightmares began in earnest. I could not remember the day itself, but his scream lived inside me, a throat that would not close. Chelsea Murphy's cry joined it then, and the sound of bodies falling. I sought help. I sat in therapists' rooms and tried to explain the vertigo of dread that seized me on certain nights. They assumed I was like 100 other people in town, haunted, terrified, a sensible victim of circumstance. I let them believe it. There were 7 blank years, a strange mercy. Sharon was born. Mark and I built a life that looked ordinary. For a while the tides of the thing within me subsided. Then Baker House happened. I could no longer pretend, no longer delude myself. The facts lined up like nails on a board. I've thought about ending it. I have imagined walking into a precinct and unspooling everything. Names, dates. I've sat in the dark and pictured Mark's face when he read the confession, Sharon's small hands in his when the bars slammed shut. The thought recoils like a hand from a flame. Could I do that to my daughter, to the man who has loved me? Could I hand them the orphaned wreckage of a life I had already broken? And now I watch the calendar, this Friday drawing near, September 27th. The hunger has already started gnawing, a hollow ache that no food can touch. It coils tighter with each passing hour, a quiet reminder that resistance is futile. I don't know what I hope for anymore. Deliverance, discovery, death? Perhaps all 3. But I do know this. When the blood moon climbs the sky, its shadow swallows me whole. And when it does, the world will bleed.